Hi, I'm Paige, and thank you so much for the introduction. Sorry I'm a little late. We just came from a really yummy lunch, so I was distracted with that. But I am so grateful to be here. I'm so thankful to Dr. McKay and McKay Bauman for all of your hard work. Everyone that I've been meeting has been so kind and lovely, and I felt very welcomed into the BYU community. Do you guys want me to use a mic? Is that helpful? Okay, cool. Well, this is my talk, Coffee Chats and Care, Research and Meaning Making in an Interfaith Emotional Community, which is just a lot of words for something that you'll actually know more about in a second. But first, I want to talk about this idea of encounter. So if you're on your computer or you're distracted, I'm going to ask you to close it for a second. Sorry to be annoying. But I want everyone to turn to their neighbors and engage in a little conversation, because I think it's helpful to know who we're sitting around and who's in the space with us. So turn to your neighbor. I'm going to give us like a minute or two and ask a question. You could ask something very basic, like, how are you doing? What do you like to eat or drink? Perhaps you have something that you're eating or drinking right now. You can talk about that, or something that's been on your mind a lot recently. So yeah, 2 minutes, let's chat, let's get to know each other.
So I'll just do private links. If someone wants them to go on our because they'll get a lot of hits, or maybe you don't want that. Some people might or might not. So yeah, but we're gonna edit them and put subtitles all the way through, so you could maybe use them for class or whatever. But ultimately, we're going to, in our publication, so through our publication, we're going to try to do some case studies in the publication.
Thank you guys for indulging me in that little exercise. Originally, I was planning on us all having like a hot drink or tea or, some kind of drink to tie in the whole theme of coffee, chats, and care, but, it's no food, no drink allowed. I can give us space, so thank you for that. So like I said earlier, we're really going to be exploring this idea of encounter. Encounter is a word that I've encountered a lot in undergrad, especially being involved in interfaith spaces. And it was a word really brought to me by one of my dear friends and mentors, Rabbi Jordan Bronig, who I know some of you know in this room. Rabbi Jordan is the Jewish chaplain at Emory, where I graduated from in May. And he has this idea of encounter where it really brings us to the presence of others. And what does it mean to encounter people right now, especially as our world is so fraught with polarization and grief and pain. And this idea took him to found the Flourishing Fellowship at Emory. I'm briefly going to introduce this fellowship and then we'll get more into it later. But this is a group of 20 to 25 Emory undergraduate students who are asked to take 40 of their peers out on coffee chats throughout the year. And this program is run through the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, but it's not it's not really branded as like a religious or spiritual program. It's really just brought up and framed as this way of community building and people getting to encounter each other. So that's a little bit about the fellowship. So if you do the math, I think this is right, I haven't taken a math class since like high school, but 25 student leaders and 40 coffee chats equals 1,000 threads by connections. That's 1,000 coffee chats that happen throughout one academic year of Emory by this cohort of Flourishing Fellows. But first, I want to contextualize a little bit about Emory University, which is located in Atlanta, Georgia. It's like a mid-size R1 research university, but also has a lot of programming that's more designated towards the liberal arts. I want to contextualize more about the Flourishing Fellowship, its predecessors, and then also myself and my role in this work. So I don't know if any of you guys were at the talk by Dean McGonigal, who is the dean, the university dean at Emory, but he talked about how Emory is historically a Methodist institution. I can say anecdotally, like, I was aware of this at Emory, but we didn't really talk much about it. And I still don't fully understand what like Emory's relationship is with Methodism. But we do have a very diverse Office of Spiritual and Religious Life. So here we can see all the chaplains. Here's Rabbi Jordan, and we have Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, and Jewish chaplains. So, and other faculty who are of other faiths and interfaiths. But this makes up a really diverse crew at a Methodist institution. So it doesn't really feel Methodist, if you get what I mean. I also want to talk about this concept and idea of flourishing. So a couple of years ago, there was a campaign called the 2036 campaign that was brought to us by the previous president of Emory University, Greg Fenves. He launched this as a major fundraising capital campaign, which amassed over $4 billion for our institution. This is the most successful campaign we've had in Emory history. It just concluded in August. But a huge part of this campaign was this idea of student flourishing, research and faculty eminence and excellence. There were a lot of classes taught about flourishing, and this was just a word that was coming over and over and over again from admin. But students, again, this is anecdotal, but also as my experience of an Emory student, didn't really understand what that meant to flourish, like what it means to flourish in all these things. So I also want to note too, this campaign really took shape after COVID, well, after COVID, that's debatable, whatever word you want to use, but in 2021. So, there was a lot of deep grief and pain, and so the Office of Spiritual and Religious Life and Rabbi Jordan in particular took this opportunity, these themes of flourishing, as a time to institute the Flourishing Fellowship. So a little bit about Rabbi Jordan's work. So he worked at Tufts for several years, and he did similar work here. He worked a lot with Hillel and this initiative for innovative community building. And I did an oral history report with him for this project, and he shared a lot about the work that he did. So it was kind of similar, like coffee chats, bringing students in, and he really grew this initiative from like 12 students to 24 fellows. And the goal of that work was to expand Jewish life and community outside the walls of Hillel, just because he heard that some Jewish students didn't feel like Hillel was what best represented their Jewish presence and identity. So that is what he came into as Emory, or like he came into Emory with this kind of work. And I also want to be honest about my involvement. Here's me with hair. And I was a fellow in my junior year of college. And so I participated in these coffee chats. At that time, we were actually paid also on top of, so we get free coffee and I get coins to take people out on coffee chats. We also get paid. That doesn't happen anymore. But I was able to get some cash from that. And then my senior year, last year, I was a senior fellow. So me and my lovely co-senior fellow, America Capuno, helped out with meetings and administrative tasks and also like mentorship for the current fellows. And yeah, like I said, this is a full academic year project. And then once you're a fellow, you can't be a fellow again. So you gotta reap all the free coffee or drinks that you can in 1 year, and then that's it. But and here's a picture of me with my two senior fellows from my year, Ezra and Cole, and then Rabbi Jordan at a Shabbat dinner at his house. Okay, so now I want to get into talking about the components of this fellowship. So I parsed out 3 main ideas that I felt were essential to the fellowship and that a lot of students voiced about their experiences. These are open-mindedness, active listening, and presence. And I really think that these 3 bubbles fall into this main idea of encounter. I also want to note too that with active listening, that's not just like a ears experience. Active listening has to do with the body and the eyes and the mind, and so we did a lot of practicing with that throughout the time in our fellowship. So I guess I'll start with how the fellowship begins. So fellows are recruited or invited, or they apply either at the end of of May of the previous year where the fellowship starts, or in the beginning of September or August of the year of their fellowship. And once they interview and apply and all those things, there's a training and orientation for students. So this is for the fellows to get to know each other, but also learn, how do I actually engage in active listening? How can I be a present person while engaging in these coffee chats? Maybe I struggle with open-mindedness. What does that look like? So that's a really important time for fellows to learn. There's also a very important component of weekly meetings within this fellowship. So every Friday, all the fellows gather and they talk and process about what their coffee chats have been like throughout the week. We have activities. Every meeting also begins with a check-in, Rosebud Thorn, how am I doing? And we do a lot of processing about major school events, like student death, student loss, especially increased violence on campus. We talk about these things, and so we're engaging in these really meaningful discussions and also creating a very safe and co-created space in these weekly Friday meetings. And there's always food. There's always bagels and schmear and just wonderful treats that Rabbi Jordan brings. And I also want to talk a little bit about these 40 coffee chats, because that's a lot of people. And so I really want to emphasize the flexibility with these chats. You can do it very traditional, okay, I'm gonna take you to Caldi's, which is our campus coffee shop, and let's get coffee, let's sit across from each other eye to eye, or we can go for a walk. Sometimes eye contact is really awkward. We can play in the grass, we can not even get a drink. We don't have to get tea, we don't have to get coffee. We can just spontaneously run into each other and have this meaningful interaction. A big part of the Flourishing Fellowship is talking about vulnerability, but how vulnerability isn't a necessity within these conversations. It's more just about presence. To have a flourishing conversation doesn't mean that you hear about this person's biggest heartbreak or worst pain they've ever felt. It's just about providing that awareness and joy for that person, and hopefully experiencing that in yourself as well. So when I was a fellow, for example, I was an RA, so sometimes I'd have a very meaningful conversation with one of my residents, and I would count this as a flourishing chat. And we had this big sheet where students can track who they met with, when they met, where they met, and any notes that they want to take down. Oh, Susie Q shared that her grandfather was sick. Maybe in 3 weeks I can check in with Susie Q and ask her how her grandfather's doing. But Rabbi Jordan and I and Erica all run we're loosey-goosey when it comes to administrative things. So this sheet isn't really highly controlled. It's just kind of a place for students to document their thoughts and feelings and who they've been meeting. We also have a retreat in the spring, so some pictures from that. So this year we went roller skating. We pretended it was my birthday to get some free food, and then we got Chinese food after, and then also had really meaningful conversations about how Flourishing had changed throughout the year. This was in the spring. There were a lot of things happening on campus, and so providing that intra-community work was also really joyful. Rabbi Jordan also hosted some other activities, this free listening kind of campaign that he did. He would just sit outside and invite people to come and chat with him. And then, Shabbat dinners, like I said, we would also have ice cream socials and invite local students and community members into discussing. And then here's a picture of us with the Buddhist monastics at Emory. There's 6 Tibetan Buddhist monks and nuns that study at Emory who I became very close with, and so here's us engaging in some like interfaith work and mindful practice. Okay, so now I feel like since I'm writing an academic paper about this, which is in process, so I'm open to suggestion. The title of this is Me Search and Meaning Making. So I want to talk about me search. I'm curious what your perceptions, definitions are of me search. Does anyone want to share what their understanding of me search is, if they've heard of it? Or maybe you haven't, and that's fine too. Has anyone heard of this term, me search? Okay. Soren.
I think that you were summarizing, I think, well on the slide. There is an idea that you are coming to know yourself through broader academic exploration.
Yeah, I love that. So that was perfectly said. Yeah, I think me search is, there's this famous quote from Beatrice Beebe, who's an infant and child psychologist, and she writes in Body Keeps the Score, she's quoted in Body Keeps the Score, most research is me search. Most of our research are the questions that we have burning in our psyche. They're the things that we don't fully understand, or else we probably wouldn't be interested or passionate or motivated about them. I really do think that most research is coming from this place of questioning and inner work and just, the burning psychic questions that we all have. So I think me search is like a powerful way to think about academics in a more holistic context. So yeah, I wrote here, what did I say? Dehomogenizing academia so that students can emerge as scholars of themselves, moving towards this framework of humanization. So I think that the Flourishing Fellowship provides this space. It's within an academic university, it's within an institution, but it's not about academics, it's not about producing, it's not about assessing, it's about understanding self and other. And so I really think that this fellowship can be a practice of me search within an academic space. And Matt Grossman, who is a political and social scientist, he quotes, as researchers of human and social behavior, we are all engaged in me search of a kind. Me search is sometimes critiqued as like a selfish and subjective practice that a lot of social scientists engage in, but at the end of the day, we're all people. Nothing is objective. Okay. And I really think that the university is this place of me search, especially institutions like Emory or institutions that are committed to the pursuit of liberal arts. Students are engaged in formation of self. We talked a little bit about yesterday about, the controversies of, are universities really just about credentialing anymore? Are they about formation at all? And so I think spaces like the Flourishing Fellowship and work by Centers of Religious and Spiritual Life offer this opportunity of me search. I also think the fellowship, specifically being within the Office of Spiritual and Religious Life, has this interesting position where students who do come from more spiritual and religious backgrounds, to be like familiar with okay, I know what this place does, I can understand what community building looks like in religious context, but also the program is very much for the SNBR, spiritual but SBNR, the spiritual but not religious folks. And again, so students are coming from all different backgrounds, spiritual, religious, academic. So food for thought. I'm open to suggestions about what people think about this. So the thesis of my in-progress paper is that the Flourishing Fellowship offers an interfaith emotional community. Barbara Rosenwein, who is a historian, works on a book. What is the, I don't have the title, or I don't have the quote. Or maybe I do. She works on a book of the history of Catholic monastics and courtly circles. And she defines an emotional community, which is written right here, as a group in which people adhere to the same norms of emotional expression and value, or devalue the same or related emotions. And I think within the Flourishing Fellowship, because you're engaged in social work, affect and emotion are very part of this process of getting to know others. Again, we also talked yesterday about how important it is to not create such a thick bifurcation between affect and knowledge, because affect is part of knowledge, and knowledge is not just a cognitive experience. And so I'm proposing that the Flourishing Fellowship is a group of people who commit to this framework of presence, active listening, and open-mindedness, all while existing within the power structure of a university. Is it possible to form a emotional community within a power structure like the university, especially right now, as higher ed is being is in a really tough spot right now? So yeah, that's a little bit about interfaith emotional community. Rabbi Jordan has also done some work, it's unpublished, about the Flourishing Fellowship, but he talks a lot about how the Flourishing Fellowship can offer a chance for students to discern a personal theology. He did some work interviewing students he's in the process of getting his doctorate in ministry right now, but he interviewed a lot of students on if they think the Flourishing Fellowship assists and provides them a way to connect with their personal theology. A lot of them said that they did. Here's a quote from his paper and how the Flourishing Fellowship can offer a sense of religious and spiritual connection. He writes, "The Flourishing Fellows program emphasized the inherent value and sacredness of human-to-human connections. Students were encouraged to access the sense of wonder and awe that is at the heart of so many wisdom traditions, simply by making the time and the space to truly encounter each other, and hopefully thereby build friendships and community connections that help them flourish at Emory and beyond." Yeah. So that was a really lovely quote from him. And also this idea of expanding genuine flourishing to the university-wide scale. As we talked about, Emory keeps bringing up this word of flourishing over and over and over again, but we have seen, especially at the events of like last or 2 springs ago, where the Georgia State Patrol came and arrested several students and faculty. I blocked out my friend's face here just for, I don't know, safety, but what does it mean to actually flourish when a lot of us don't feel like we have access to this idea of interconnectedness and safety that interfaith work provides? Emory's done a lot of work with creating spaces for different student identities. So here's a picture of the Center for Women on the left. This is part of student affinity spaces. We have different student identities and groups who have these spaces in this large building on campus. But there's also critiques that there aren't spaces for these students to actually come together. They're very much segregated. And, so I'm thinking a lot about this idea of liminal spaces, and can we manufacture liminal spaces or fellowships in which we feel encouraged to engage in interfaith work, and maybe not even interfaith work, but just dialogue. I also want to talk to you about how the Flourishing Fellowship isn't about delivering some sort of spiritual approach in a secular packaging. It's really just about talking about encounter and what encounter means. Okay. Because at the end of the day, what does it mean to encounter? What does that look and feel like to you? I felt very lucky to be in this space for the past 2 days at this conference and engaging with a lot of you. And I really have felt this sense of encounter. And also been very inspired because I think a lot of times within university chaplaincy and universities, we jump to trying to create this perfect framework for interfaith dialogue. And like I said earlier, if we can't face each other and we can't feel safe in the institutions that we're a part of, then how are we ever gonna be interfaith? Which is, I'm not saying anything revolutionary here, but it feels like that right now. Yeah, so that's kind of all I had for you, but I would love to hear more and hear questions and just hear your thoughts. But yeah, that's what I have for now. Thanks. Yeah.
What do you mean by liminal spaces?
Yeah, I don't really know either. So liminal spaces, I feel it's kind of this idea of third space where it's an escape or absence of what we engage in a daily life. Liminal space provides kind of a more nuanced opportunity to understand yourself and your position and just what's going on. So I don't know if that actually answered it at all. Sometimes I answer questions with more confusing things. But yeah, I'm trying to think about if the Flourishing Fellowship can exist as this third space or liminal space while also being within
an institution, within being in the Office of Spiritual and Religious Life. And maybe it doesn't need to be, like maybe it can just be like very much within those networks and like very embedded into the community at large. Yeah. Yeah.
I had a question about the interfaith emotional community. I was fascinated by that definition. And so I suppose the question I have is, if an emotional community is a group that adheres to the same norms of emotional expression, I just wonder if it isn't the case that it's possible that different faith traditions might inform different norms of emotional expression. And so how is it that, how do you see the fellowship controlling that tension when certain traditions might have different norms of emotional expression, but the emotional community you're trying to create is trying to have this sense of shared emotional expression norms?
Yeah, totally. That's a really great question. I think that is definitely something that, as a senior fellow, I contended with a lot and thought of and talked a lot about with Rabbi Jordan and Narika, because students are coming from all different faith backgrounds, no faith background, countries, states, and some students didn't really want to get deep. They didn't really want to go on 40 coffee chats. Like, they signed up to get free coffee, you know. They didn't like, they're not like, oh yeah, I get to like talk to 40 strangers, because I guess I forgot to specify this, but the 40 coffee chats can be with like friends, peers, random classmates. Like, you can really take anyone out on coffee chats. It's not like a set thing. And so I think one thing that we really try and invite into the space of Flourishing Fellows is like, come as you are, and don't come if like that, like if you don't feel like coming that day, you don't have to. And I think like within the actual Friday sessions, we really get into the heart of what people are experiencing. And I also think that those Friday sessions are a very co-created space. So we had one student who self-identified as atheist, and they were really just not into religion and talking about religion, but they were very passionate about coffee. It's part of the reason why they signed up for the fellowship. And so they led a little like Turkish coffee making workshop in class. And so, you know, they didn't really share much about like their theology or what's going on in Turkey or their place and religious experiences in Turkey. They talked about how they make meaning through coffee. So I think that's just like one example of how students can express themselves, and you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a outward emotional act of vulnerability for there to be some sort of like emotional community. Because I think at the end of the day, our emotional community as interfaith is like just about meeting people where they are, and inviting that possibility of any kind of emotional expression, whether that be like crying or sharing from the heart, or like making coffee and like forcing us to all taste this coffee that we just, you know, that was really strong, and we were all like, whoa, okay. But it was a really wonderful experience, yeah.
For the coffee chats, were there any guidelines on conversation or goals?
No. It's a very, very free-flowing experience. Yeah, we were basically just like, you know, if you want to talk for 30 minutes, great. There were some people that were like, oh, I had a coffee chat that was 5 hours long. I could never sustain that. But some people did. And so it really was just like connect with the people that you're sitting next to in class. Maybe like hang out with a roommate that you had freshman year that you haven't talked to in a while, and just see what happens. Like be curious, invite the capacity and ability to be surprised, and just be present with that person. Yeah.
Is there anything about the next iteration of coffee chats that's going to look different from what you guys have done in the past?
Yeah, so this program is hitting its 4th year this year, and they're running it again. That I don't know. I think we've tried different iterations of having fellows form committees and like doing more outreaching work, like you know, more programmed events for the community. A lot of times, like we want the space to be not focused really on like productivity and assessment. So we've kind of moved away from that model. I can't really say for this year what is changing, but I know that a lot of the fellows are still really involved in doing flourishing work, so a lot of them have taken on like community dinners, although they'll host like once a month community dinners for like through the flourishing fellowship, but like kind of adjacent, yeah. Or like, people will host like study hours in the Interfaith Center. So a lot of it like inspires students to take on their own initiatives and projects after the fellowship, and then they kind of like build projects off of that. Yeah.
This isn't really a question so much as an observation, but I work at Interfaith and Faith-based and something that I feel like we always have to keep in mind is that obviously about 50% of our students are Latter-day Saints, and the next largest worldview group is atheist, agnostic, secular, spiritual, not religious. And so I feel like I'm always wrestling with this whenever we're doing student programming, is how to appeal to students who aren't religious, who, you know, are agnostic or atheist, or, you know, maybe they see the word interfaith and they don't think that that applies to them because of the word faith. So I just like, during this whole thing was thinking, and I just want to acknowledge like how this can reach into that space, and like, because, you know, if people come into our events, I tell them, well, even if you're not religious, you have a worldview. There's a way that you see and a way that you know, communicate with the world and you experience the world, and that's your worldview. And for some people, it's religious, you know, and for you, it's not. So I just want to point out, like, that's really cool that this is a way for people to kind of maybe be, like, softly inducted into the ideas of interfaith cooperation without really that label that might feel polarizing to them.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think a big component of what we were talking about yesterday is this idea of moving from theological neutrality to theological celebration,
Yes.
And also acknowledging that theological can have a ton of diverse meanings. Making the spiritual accessible to all beings is something that I'm personally very passionate about, and I think that this fellowship tries to do a good job of. Again, open to critiques, like, that's fine. But anyways, I know I'm over time, so I'll end here, but thank you all for your attention, and go for it.